we on? I don't know if it's on me yet. Here we go. Well, people, we're here again with our sofa sessions, and this week we're talking about kids and youth, and with the constant in-your-face pressures that youths are experiencing these days, it's great to get the thoughts, the wisdom, and the perspective of someone who I remember holding in my arms as a little baby. So either she's bare young or I'm bare old. Answers in the chat, please. So please give it up for Ruby Head. So wagwan, Ruby.
You all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can't see you though, so I'm not sure if. Here we go. There we go. So what's happening then?
Yeah, all good. Lockdown
good?
stuff. Yeah.
Now, Ruby, you're a bit of a artist, right? And I hear that your most recent art project involved a certain body part. So was that like the eyes or the ears or the mouth? Come on, tell us a little bit about that.
I don't know what this is. I don't know what
don't you?
No.
Oh well,
I'm a bit dodgy.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, anyway, let's just kick straight into it. So, Ruby, you've grown up in church, and it'd be great to hear a bit about your journey and experiences through Kids Club and youth over the past few years.
Yeah, cool. So I was at Kids Club from when I was young, because obviously mum and dad brought up in a Christian family. So Kids Club was always fun. They got you chatting to God and praying and like doing prophetic stuff from young, which is like really cool because you get a relationship from God from early, which is quite special. And then I really loved youth when I turned like 11. I loved youth because you could go there and you can ask them all your questions that you're probably not supposed to ask, but they're like, it's like a judgmental free place. That, yeah, it was real fun. And probably my favorite thing about being young and going through youth was Natalie would pick up me and Caitlin from secondary school and take us for like chocolate cake and a hot chocolate or whatever. Like every week she would take us out and just disciple us and chat to us. And Karen would do that as well. She would meet us after school and we would go to a cafe and then stay there till closing. We'd just chat for ages. It was so nice. And then as we got older, like Natalie and Mark, we'd go to Mark's to play poker, and then we'd go to Kate and Jules's with Natalie and Mark and eat like so much sweets and chocolate. And then we'd go and have chicken and chips with Mark and Natalie, and it was just so good because you got to hang out, and it was like you had an extra family in church. Like, yeah, and to be honest, when you're young, all you want is love and attention. So and food as well. So when you're like just sitting with some good people, eating some good food and having some good real conversations, it was really valuable. Yeah.
Great having those people in your life that gave the time up for you, spent time with you. That sounds great.
Yeah, so
and
good.
Growing up in East London in the 2000s has its own challenges, like I said earlier. So how has knowing Jesus helped you in this?
Yeah, because like nothing is constant in this world. Everything changes all the time. It goes from like different fashions, like phones change, social media change, like all these trends are changing, and there's only Jesus is the only thing that is constant. And you do learn that when you grow up, and you know everything does change. And I remember but a story, I guess, is when I was in year 8, I'd had a really hard time, and I was a 12-year-old, and I would cry like every day. I hated school. I didn't want to do it. And I remember just praying and being like, and people praying for me and being like, well, I love God, isn't God God? And from there I was kind of taught that actually no, it's not smooth sailing. It ain't easy, but it taught me to trust in God from probably the age of 12. And also I guess people probably think like from the age of 12 you don't really have real problems, but something that I was thinking is that if it matters to you, then it matters to God. Like, don't underestimate or don't like not value young people's opinions and feelings on like their trials, because God has the eternal perspective. Adults have an adult perspective, so God still cares for adult perspective, like adult problems, children's problems. Like, yeah, so that was one thing. And the trials when you like going up through school, like school is really hard. Like, I don't know anyone that's had a good time at school. The trials are quite clear, like, or it's less like passive aggressive in the office. They leave you out because you're a Christian, or when it's at school, they do say straight up questions and be like, no, you're wrong, you're crap, like Christians are weird or whatever. So it does teach you to like, you just have to make a decision from young. You can't compromise. So yeah, and another thing is it gives you a purpose to life. So when you're doing like exams or whatever, the pressure can like make you or break you. So if you just do your best to try and please God and do it for God, that's the only thing that you feel comfortable doing your best, because your best may not be the world standard, like the best in the world standard, but it is your best by God's standard, and that's all that really matters. So yeah, and even now, like when I'm not feeling uni and I don't even want to do it anymore, I'm doing it for God and I. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing you'd want to say to your younger self, Ruby, what would that be?
There'd be a lot of outfit choices I would rethink. Like, I don't know why I bought an umbrella hat, but yeah. So yeah. But when I was young, mum and dad, like my siblings will say this, we're always taught to be different and not trying to be unique or the special one. It was trying to be different by the world standards. So the best way to be different is to be like Jesus, because no matter what, you're going to be different and you're going to stand out and you are going to be a light in a really, really dark world. So yeah, and another thing I'd say is everyone's trying to be unique, everyone's trying to be the special one, everyone's trying to be seen, and when the world tells you to dress a certain way or act a certain way, you're going to look exactly the same as everyone else. So yeah, so you have to actively make a choice and make your actions be like Jesus and reflect Jesus. So if you have to be friends with like the smelly kid or something, or like you have to be confident with what you say, you have to just do it. Do you know what I mean? You can't be one or the other. You've got to be all in on not at all. Yeah.
And who was the smelly kid? Was it Alfie?
Yeah, it was probably me. I was a smelly kid. Yeah.
Lastly, you are a voice for your generation and we are all ears. So what would you like to say to us as a church as we look to engage and disciple a generation?
Yeah. I like this question. I think one thing is adopt a youth. So with what Natalie and Mark did to me, like I went over to theirs like for a meal every week, and it's just, you get a new family, and like I was saying, all you want is attention and you just want to be loved, you know what I mean? So you're going to find it from like male attention, or you're going to find it from trying to impress your friends or something. So they're going to find it somewhere, so you might as well be there to be a good example, and you know, just to be their friend, to be a sister, to be a brother, a dad, or a mum or something when they're maybe lacking. And a good thing is to love them, then challenge them. So when you've got a relationship with them, they'll hear what you've got to say, and they'll love, they'll know when you challenge them, it's coming from a good place. And if you disagree or whatever, they're always got your back. And yeah, that's what you really want, is them to have your back. And I guess if you're like an adult being like, how can I relate to youth, is literally just be yourself. I know that sounds obvious, but everyone around you is trying to fit in. Everyone around you is trying to be liked. And when you're just real and you are just yourself, then you're more likable and you can you can trust them. So don't try to relate. Just be yourself with them and be honest with them, and they'll just be like, right, this person's real. They want to spend time with me, like not try to be my friend or try to change me or whatever. They just want to be your friend and be loved. And also my final point, I guess, is to don't underestimate any of them. So even with rough edges, we ask even adults and be like, oh, would you like to come on? What would you like to say? What do you feel passionate about? And they're like, oh no, I don't know what to say. I don't know if I'll be able to give anything valuable. But honestly, everyone has something that they feel passionate about. Everyone's got a real good voice, things that grind their gears, or something that they can chat about. It's just they have true opinions as well. Like, just, you know, don't underestimate them, and don't underestimate yourself, I guess, as well. Yeah.
And tell us, just to end with there, you know, what is Rough Edges for people that don't know about it? So a bit of a shout out for that.
Yeah. It's a podcast aimed at anyone, I guess, but youth culture, talking about faith and talking about like current issues, which I guess is quite good in this time. Lots of issues to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you can access that via Spotify, isn't it? If you look up
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from. Yeah, I'm doing a real plug here, aren't I?
yeah, good. It's worth listening to. There's a lot of different topics on there, people. So yeah, worth checking that one out. Well, thank you very much, Ruby. Really appreciate that. Give it up for Ruby. Okay, over to you, Steve-O, in Studio 28.
Studio 28. Guys, good morning. Ruby, you are an absolute star. You're such a top girl. I was watching some of the chats coming in there, and I think your voice is a lot louder than you realize, and it's just so good to have that authenticity and hear it straight up. So thank you so much. Absolutely loving this series and the stories and the people, and it's so good to be part of East End Church. But guys, what we're doing this term is we're doing this series asking the question of what are the foundations which East End Church is built on. And over the past few weeks, we've kind of said we are a people of the word and spirit, and we are on a mission to make disciples, and we want to build this beautiful church, this diverse church, which reflects Jesus's heart for the poor, for the lost, for the needy. But as we hit 10 years, as elders, we didn't want to just speak about what we are standing on, but where we are walking to. So where is God taking us as we look ahead to the next 10 years? Where are we going? And today we are literally speaking on the future of the church. We are speaking about the younger generation, the under 20s. And I'm going to try and keep it short. There's just three things we're going to go through today: the why, the who, and the how. Why is this important? Who are we speaking about? And most importantly, so what? How can we as a church, that challenge Ruby gave us, how do we respond to disciple, to train up, to raise a generation for Jesus? And today, guys, we're not speaking about the kids and the youth. East End youth, East End kids, nippers, if you are listening to me, I want to speak to you. And right at the start, I want to read out a verse which reminds you of who you are to God. It came out through the kids club. It's from Jeremiah. He's this young lad. He's getting called by God. And it says this in Jeremiah 1, verses 4 through to 7. The word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Just let that sink in. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart and I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you. So why is this important? Why we've got 13 weeks speaking on foundations. Why as elders did we think speaking on kids and youth is worth a week? I'll tell you why. Why? Because if we want to see a church raised up, we need to see a generation raised up. If we want to see the East End of London transformed, we need to see this generation transformed. Why? Because as we heard with the bodybuilding bride, guys, you are part of East End Church. You see, our Sunday mornings, we are not babysitting our children. On Friday nights at youth, we are not just entertaining. We are doing this to introduce you to the real Jesus. And you see, you are not just part of East End Church. You guys are the future of it. Why? Because you've got a voice. Just like Ruby said, just like we saw with Jeremiah, you have a unique voice and God wants to speak through you guys. Kids, youth, he wants to speak through you. And it might not be popular. What you've got to say might not fit what the world thinks, but those words he says, do not be afraid, for I am with you. Why? Because if you are important to Jesus, you are important to us. You see, I'll read out another verse. It comes from Matthew 19, verse 14. And Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. That kids club session today, amazing. I loved it. Psalm 127, children are a gift from God. Why? Because throughout history, God works through the unexpected, and often age is no barrier. You see, I don't know about you guys, maybe you've never asked the question, how old were people in the Bible when? Well, let's have a little look. You take the disciples. They say that when they were called by Jesus, a couple of them were probably late teenagers. Most of them were under 30. You look at David when he slew Goliath, he was about 17 years old. Yeah, you look at Mary, the mother of God, when she gave birth to Jesus, she was probably a teenager, 16 to 18. And when I hear, it does two things. One, it challenges me to look at people and look at our young people with the importance that Jesus does. But young people, kids and youth, I hope you know that it means your age is not a barrier to God. Again, it says in 1 Timothy 4 verse 12, do not let anyone look down on you because of your youth. As God said through Jeremiah, do not say, I am too young. You are exactly where God wants you to be. You see, why? Because in 10 years' time, the average age of us elders is going to be 57. We're going to be getting on. Before you know it, time's going to go by. We'll be raising up the next generation, raising up leaders. And you see, Charlie, she gave me a brilliant book. It's called Generation Z. I encourage all of you to read it. If you want a copy, let me know and I'll get you one. But in it, this guy, James White, he says this, left to itself, the church will grow old. First, you will lose the 20-somethings, then the 30-somethings. And if we do not continue to prioritize and focus on the younger generation, the church will get older and older and smaller and smaller. Why? Because you guys, kids, you are a gift from God. You are created by God. You are known by God. You are loved by God. A God who has a plan and a God who has a purpose for you. A God who will never fail you, never turn his back on you. A God who will never give up on you. That is who you are. Your identity is in him. And church, you've got to listen to me. If we want to see a growing and a thriving and a lasting church here in East London, what we do with the younger generation, our young people, is so key to that. Why? Because they matter to Jesus. So hopefully you're clear that, guys, our young people are important. They matter to Jesus. They've got a voice. They're created by him. But who are we talking about? You see, who are we even talking about? Well, there's a verse I love. It's in Chronicles, 1 Chronicles, verse 12, verse 32, chapter 12. And you see, at this time, David is raising up an army. And it's a really small verse, but it says this. It says, men from Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. Men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. And we want to be a church which understands the times and knows what we should do. You see, if we want to be able to reach and disciple and train and raise up a generation, we need to understand this generation. If we are to transform culture, we need to understand culture. You see, the gospel does not change. Jesus, he is the same yesterday, he is the same today, he is the same forevermore. Jesus, he is always relevant and he will always be relevant. You see, 66 books written over hundreds of years by many authors, but it is one story about one name, and that is Jesus. But how we communicate the gospel can change. I become all things to all people, so by all means possible, I might win some. You see, we are talking about a generation which has probably never even licked a postage stamp. A generation who wasn't alive when Princess Diana was born. A generation who doesn't need to scroll up 10 times when you're looking for your birth year in an app. We're talking about a generation which is growing older, younger. A generation where parents are protecting them less in a world that is so much more to be protected from. We're talking about a generation who's been dealt a tough hand. You see, as Pauline prayed last week, a generation, it has been a tough year. It's been hard with school. It's been hard with work. It's going to have ongoing impacts. A generation who is struggling with identity and mental illness and mental health. We're speaking about a generation where the words acceptance and affirmation, they mean exactly the same thing. That in order for me to accept you, I need to affirm who you are, what you do, and what you say. You see, we're talking about a distracted generation, a generation who's never been more distracted. You've got porn available at the tip of your fingers. You can hide behind a screen. You can learn through a screen. You are discipled by a screen. But, and I loved what Ruby said, we are talking about a generation who more than ever are asking the question, what can I build my life on? What can I build my life on? You see, and yeah, there is a lot of broken homes. Yes, there is a lot of hurt. Yes, there is a lot of struggles. But this generation, I tell you now, they have got a sixth sense. They have got a sixth sense for being authentic. They want the truth. They want it real. They don't want religion. And you see, what we need to do, they want to know what the truth is. They want to know that they're important. And they want to know, in a world which is shaking, what can I build my life on? I loved what came up in worship. You know, you had a vow saying, God himself, the rock eternal. Sean bringing out that the world may be changing, but he does not change. We build our life when the world is shaking on Jesus. And you see, this is a unique generation. It's a generation that matters to Jesus. It's a generation who's hungry for the truth. But the question I want to finish with is, so what? How do we respond? As we look forward as a church for our kids and our nippers and our youth, what are we going to do? Now, quick story. I'm going to rewind my life a little bit. And I grew up in New Zealand. I grew up in an amazing church. And my teenage years, like a lot of people, were probably the most influential in my walk with Jesus than any others. You see, I had a great youth group. We had this fantastic guy who was leading it. He was fun. He took us out fishing in his boat. We had countless barbecues at his place, chucking another shrimp on the barbie, Stevie the Kiwi. He opened his doors. He made us feel important. He was always available. He had a great way of explaining and applying the gospel. And I didn't realize it, but I was putting him in this elevated position. I was partly putting my faith in him. And you see, it all came crashing down. His marriage fell apart. His life circumstances changed. And sadly, like a lot of people, his faith followed. And man, this hit me more than it should have. Because I was looking for him, my youth leader, to be something and someone which only Jesus could be. And you see, guys, in the past couple of months, a lot of Christians, a lot of young people have really struggled as these big Christian voices, these big Christian influences have not reflected the God who they follow. You've had Ravi Zacharias. You've had Carl Lentz. And you see, Gandhi, he once said this. He said, I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And you see, the explosion of the early church was because they were very much like Jesus. And if we are to reach our young people and reach the East End of London, we need to be very much like Jesus. We point then to him. You see, on Monday, I was out walking with a guy a lot younger than me. It is a guy I respect more than most, a wise guy. And we were talking about today, actually, kids and youth. And he goes, Steve, I've never been quoted in a preach before. And I said, well, that's about to change. And we were speaking about this, and he says, more important with kids and youth than the how is the why and the who. You see, they're not looking for instruction, do this, do that, do this, do that. They are looking for inspiration. They're looking for inspiration. And you see, how we do this is by living a life which leads to a why. As Ruby said, live a life which leads to a why. Your life will look different. Why are you spending time with me? Why are you showing me that I'm important? Why have you opened your home to me? Why does your life look different? Why? Well, why do you go and drop stuff around to all the kids across East End Kids on your Saturday? Why? Because when you lead a life which asks the why, it lets you introduce them to the who. Jesus. You see, East End nippers, if you go and ask them, they will sum up my preach. They will say, God has a plan. Jesus is the greatest superhero. God has a plan, and Jesus is the greatest superhero. And you see, guys, we need to inspire. We need to show them, not just tell them that there is a hope and there is a future. We need to be authentic. We need to be real. Like Mark and Natalie opening up their homes. Like Ruby and Elijah bigging up mentoring. Like Lauren investing time into our young people. Like Charlie, like Lindsay, passionately pursuing our kids. And you see, last year, the biggest marketing firm in New York said this, that if you cannot communicate in 5 words in a picture, you are never going to reach this generation. You see, the average time spent online watching a video, 2 minutes. Distractions on the internet around 8 seconds. We need to communicate quickly, we need to communicate visually, and we need to communicate bite-sized chunks, maybe not 45-minute preachers. And last thing, through God, like God throughout history, let's not be afraid to put weight on our young people. You see, Charlie and Amber, I love the fact you led Kids Club today. And what we need to be doing is calling our young people out of their comfort zone. We need to be calling them to hard work. We need to be calling them to a big vision. And I'll tell you now, this is not going to make our young people leave church. It is going to be the thing that makes them stay. You see, Tom once said to me, he said, Steve, teenage boys are a little bit like a dump truck on ice. If you do not put enough weight on them, they are just going to start sliding out. And so, guys, to finish, I want to challenge us all. Let's be a church and a people which invest into, which prioritize, which learn from, which get alongside, which disciple, which pray for our young people. You see, if God stirs something in you, if you want to be part of the answer, not part of the problem, come speak to me. We'd love to get you involved in nippers and kids and youth. But you see, the place we start and what we're going to do now is we pray. You see, it's not about me standing here with one-line vision statements for kids or youth, because our vision is his vision. Our mission is his mission. That what we're going to do is we are going to pray that God breaks through into this generation. That God, like the days of old, would come and he would speak to our young people in dreams, that he would speak to them in visions, that he would speak to them in audible voices, that he would give them a hope and a future, that our young people would know that in him they have their identity and they have their purpose. Like Carl said, that they are children of God, that like Emily prayed out, they would know their security and their surety is in him, that we would pray for this generation, that they would drive us forward as a church, that they would know Jesus, they would know their identity, their hope, their future is found only in him. And so what we're going to do now